So tell us the setup here, because Raybel's not in the water, so where's Raybel and what's that big white thing behind you?
Okay, so this beautiful white chrysalis made of the finest plastic tarpaulin is from whence our beautiful Raybel will emerge. It's basically an old rubbish lighter that's been converted into a dry dock. It's been extended on one side, and then there's blocks inside that Raybel was floated onto. Hoops were welded over the top, the tarpaulin cover was pulled over the top, and then inside we put a staging round so we could get to the sides of Raybel.
So how did you get Raybel in there?
How do you get Raybel into the dry dock?
Yeah.
Okay, well it's good fun, it's a good kind of lateral thinking question. So twice a day the tide comes up and goes down again. So you pick a day when you've got a very high tide, you take the dry dock to the deepest part of the water you can find, and you sink her. She sinks. And when the tide comes in, the water fills the dry dock up, the dry dock stays on the bottom. Meanwhile, Raybel is floating on the high tide, and you bring Raybel and you position it over the dry dock in exactly the right place. How do they do that? I don't know. And then the tide starts going down, Raybel goes down, and she lands perfectly with inches to spare on the blocks. And then the whole thing is lying on the floor and all the water's flowing out of the dry dock, and then when all the water's flowed out of the dry dock, you close the valves, and 12 hours later the water comes up again, and in theory and in practice this time, thank goodness, the whole shebang floats.
That sounded like it must have been a pretty nerve-wracking day.
Well, the shipwrights were confident, but there were so many opportunities for disaster. If the dry dock wasn't deep enough and Raybel had got caught halfway in, and then we couldn't get her out, and then the tide had gone out, that would have snapped her in half. If she'd got caught on any of the blocks and couldn't get her in properly, then we wouldn't have been able to make the seal at the end of the dry dock, and she wouldn't have floated. If she'd gone in and the weight of everything was in the wrong place and the dry dock hadn't floated, and then of course you've got to make sure that the whole thing floats before Raybel actually starts swirling around on the tide, so big ropes getting them all tied in exactly the right position. It's a lot of experienced people knowing what they were doing basically. So all the gear was stripped off Raybel before she went into the dry dock, so basically had a hull. One of the problems was that when we got her into the dry dock, the bow had slumped, and we don't know whether she'd just slumped when she dried out. You know, the water may have been supporting that bow. But the front slumped, and that's wrong. So basically the shipwrights started rebuilding that whole front bow. Didn't go.
I didn't notice it didn't flash up on my phone.
Oh, did it not?
Okay, there you go.
Okay, so hello everyone, welcome. So we're just going to step onto Raybel and yeah, just going to speak to the assistant shipwright and then the shipwright. So. Yeah, all the galleys been stripped out. Okay, so we're going to take you through now, and we're going to introduce Tim, who is the lead shipwright.
Yeah, what we've got here is a rotten barge. What we're trying to do is we're trying to achieve a barge that isn't rotten.
Good.
You want it to float?
Yeah, we want it to float. When we first dry docked the barge, we found that the bow, due to lack of strength and rot, was starting to drop off. So initially what we did was we jacked the barge back into shape, lifted the bow approximately 5-6 inches. Then we decided that we had to remove the 6-foot end off of the main keelson here, in order to access the timbers underneath it, which were in dire need of replacement. We've then systematically replaced these floors and futtocks here, and at the same time we're obviously renewing the frames that work off of them. We're going to put steel brackets in to connect the frames to the floors. Up forward we're going to leave these 3 frames here which are deemed to be in good condition low down. We're obviously going to replace the tops of them. We're also going to be replacing the apron which is the piece of timber right up forward, which basically holds all the plank ends together. And that is about it in here. Saved another lot for one more order. Otherwise we're going to have too much wood around there. Historically, they would have what was known as a grown wooden knee in place of these steel knees. Now, it's terribly difficult to get hold of good quality oak anyway, and to get hold of a good quality bit of oak that's good enough to use for that knee is nearly impossible today, which is why we've put the steels in there, because it gives an incredible amount of strength, and we can shape and fabricate those in position.
In terms of the fabric, like anybody, you want to kind of retain as much of the original as possible. How has that been possible on Raybel so far?
In terms of retaining the fabric?
Original, yeah.
I will endeavour to retain anything that's worth keeping.